Good afternoon, everybody. How are you today?
So good.
Good? Good? Thankful to be here. I'm excited to have you. My name is Brandy Vega. I'm the founder of Promise to Live and Good Deed Revolution. We've got an incredible lineup today. We're going to hear briefly from Dr. David Morgan in just a moment. And then we have our speakers today. We have Michael Anderson and we have Chris Williams. Both have incredible messages. I'm sure that's why you guys are here. So we're also going to talk to you about our holiday hug project. We have hugs for the holidays, so I want you guys to kind of think about this. Our goal is, how many of you in here have pocket hugs that we've given you? The coins, right? Our goal is to hug 50,000 people for the holidays. That means writing a letter and giving them a hug, a coin. Here's the thing. We have 5,300 police officers in the state. And the Fraternal Order of Police is hoping that we can give them all hugs because they need it. We need a sponsor to help us cover costs. Okay, so we have 5,300 police officers. We have 2,200 Department of Corrections that also we're hoping to hug, as well as thousands of individuals and families who are struggling for the holidays. We'll be working with Thanksgiving deliveries, dinners for their Thanksgiving. We want to give them hugs too. So, and what the hug is, if you guys haven't seen it, I want to make sure you do see it. It says, when times are tough and you don't know what to do, here's a hug from me to you. Part of what we do with Promise to Live is we want people to make a promise to reach out for help. And we know the holidays can be hard. So the promise of reaching out for help, we have that on the coin. It says, if you're struggling, call or text 988. We've been working to promote 988 for the last 2 years. It's been out 2 years and still only about 20% of people know about it. So we want to promote that because you can call or text 24/7. So anyway, I'm just going to put this out here. I never ask for anything. This time I'm asking for something. I'm asking if you have the budget. If you don't have budget but you have bandwidth, can you help us write letters of hope? So we've got 25 packs, 10 packs, 200 packs, and we got 1,000 packs in our car of coins and of cards. We would love to make this a fun service project within your family, your church group, your organization, or your business. Getting together and then delivering this, we want to give them to senior centers. I can just tell you, I've delivered care packages to senior centers for the last, I did it for a lot of years. And some of those people don't ever get any visitors. When was the last time you got a handwritten letter? It doesn't happen very often. Everything's just text or email, or it's like a blanket statement. So we want to give them hope. We want to give them something to read. We want to give them something that they can hold on to. Because for me, the history of the hug is this. A friend sent it to me and said, Brandy, sometimes those at the top that are helping everybody are struggling and nobody checks on them. I was like, interesting. Yes, and thank you. And it was just a generic pocket hug. I kept that in my pocket for about 4 or 6 weeks. And I found myself reaching in there all the time. And every time I reached in there and touched it, it was just zing, a reminder to my brain. Somebody cared about me. They cared enough to send this to me. That's awesome. I'm loved. This is good. And when I had to speak at my friend's son's funeral, her second child that died by suicide, I was really struggling. And I remember having my hand in my pocket because I'm getting ready to speak at this funeral, and it's her second child she's lost. And I'm just holding on to it, and I'm rubbing it between my fingers, and it was just this reminder that you're loved, it's okay, here's comfort. And I reached in and I gave it to the mom. And I said, you know what, Kathy, you might need this more than me right now. And she took it and she held on to it. And a week later, she wrote me back. There's a deeper spiritual story if anyone wants to talk about that. See me later. But she wrote me a week later and she said, that coin got me through the hardest week of my life. Every time I saw it, touched it, felt it, I felt like you were there with me. It made all the difference in the world. When you can't be there, knowing that somebody cares is a big deal. So we hope that you guys will help us hug 50,000 people. Hug as in pocket hug, not as KSL said, as in hugging everybody and spreading COVID. If they want to hug, go for it, but we love hugs. But if you guys can do that, we need sponsors for our military, we need it for our police departments, we need it for our senior centers, we need it for our minority groups, and we're doing students and hospitals, okay? We have information back there you can scan, and that's our hugs. Actually, can you scroll one? Hey, look, Hugs for the holidays. So this is our campaign, and we're just spreading it out to everyone. We did a press release. Channel 2 did a great story. Mary and I did that. Thank you, Mary. And then we did KSL. So if anyone wants to run this, please see us and talk about that. Now, I am going to pass the time on. I'm not going to share a talk. Today I was really thinking a lot about forgiveness. And just a quick thought that I had on the drive up here. As a busy working mom who did so many things, I gave talks to groups like this, and my talk would be quality time over quantity time. Just because I knew I couldn't spend time with my kids like I wanted to, so I tried to make every moment count. And that's really that's bothered me a lot this past week, because I think that my daughter moved out. The reason I do this, she moved out about a month ago and got her own apartment. She graduated high school a full year early. Thank you. She just made the mascot for the Dallas Mavericks. They loved it so much, they commissioned another mascot from her. She did Cosmo, Bumble, she's incredibly talented. She looks like a cute little tiny tot, and she got her own house. I'm sure DCFS is gonna say, where's your parents? But it's been hard for me to have that void and the time that I'm missing out on. And I'm beating myself up as a parent because I didn't spend the time. And I told myself, oh, it's quality over quantity. I'm working to forgive myself because I don't get those moments back. And I'm working to make every moment we have count, every second, every moment. And that's why now we've been doing a lot of soul searching. We're going to be simplifying so that we can magnify the things that matter most. And for me, that's faith, family, and philanthropy. It's promise to live. Because I need to forgive myself. But part of forgiveness, I think, is changing what's broken. And if you're doing the same thing over and over, and you're not able to live life, promise to live, in the fullest. Promise to live isn't just about living and deciding that I'm going to thrive and stay alive. Promise to live is about promising to live every moment, every second, no matter what you're going through, no matter what medical diagnosis, no matter what it is. We want you to live it to the fullest, to have meaning, to have purpose, to have fulfillment. And some of us don't know what that is yet. So I would challenge you as we go through today's stuff that you think about, where do I find fulfillment? Have I forgiven myself for things that have happened in the past? And what am I doing to create the life and the future moving forward? So with that being said, I will turn it over now to Dr. David Morgan.
Thank you, Brandy. And thanks for sharing that tender story as well. I love that because we resonate with that. There's no one in here who didn't think about their own lives right then and something maybe they wish they had done better or things they can do going forward. So Brandy's such a great example, and we love having her here. Like she said, I'm Dr. David Morgan. I'm a licensed psychologist and the Director of Mental Health Awareness here at Silicon Slopes. And I want to talk a little bit just about, forgiveness and mental health. When we talk about forgiveness, we necessarily mean that there has been some sort of slight, right? There's some sort of wrong, and in that situation, there's going to be a perpetrator, either someone who knows they did something wrong or didn't know, but someone did something wrong, and then there's a victim in that situation. And then forgiveness is needed because there's been a wrong that's happened. Sometimes with people that are victimized in any way, they get some of these feelings: powerlessness, defensiveness, self-sabotage, lack of confidence, pessimism, and self-pity. And these are terrible feelings. We don't like this. Anytime there is a victimization, there's an automatic imbalance of power, right? The person who was the offender has done something that's put the victim in a situation where they feel off balance, and that's what creates many of these feelings. These feelings are very natural to experience in the moment and even shortly after the victimization. The problem is when those feelings continue, and it's a year later, it's 5 years later, it's 10 years later, it's 30 years later, and the person is still experiencing these same feelings from an event that may have happened decades earlier. And that's part of the problem, because then the victim remains in a powerless situation. And oftentimes we call that a victim stance, where people get stuck in this. As psychologists and other mental health professionals, we deal a lot with this, people coming in and saying, how do I get past this? I've worked with many individuals throughout my career that way. So the goal, I think, in the victim situation is they want power back. They want that, what previously kind of imbalance of power, to be shifted back in their favor. They want to feel that power back that was taken from them when they were victimized. So oftentimes, or not oftentimes, but being victimized creates a power imbalance, and then the victim feels powerless. And then sometimes what they think is, well, if I refuse to forgive the person, then I have power over that person. And so they hang on to that forgiveness. They continue to hold that other person accountable, at least in their own mind, and say, I'm never going to forgive that person. But while the goal of that is to increase power in your life, it has the absolute opposite effect. It keeps you powerless when you do that. The power comes in the forgiveness. The power comes when you say, you know what, I'm done with this, I'm moving on, and I've got a few things that might help there for people who might be in that situation. So I want to give you just a hypothetical situation here, because oftentimes when we think about the perpetrators, I worked in forensic psychology for about 20 years, worked with perpetrators of all sorts for many years, and people said, how can you work with them? How can you sit down in a room with people who have done these things? And I said, it's easy, because I get to know them. And once I got to know them, I realized things about them, right? And I never absolved them from their crimes. I never said, oh, well, you were fine to do that, because that was never right what they did. But the more I understood about them, the better I came to understand the sequence of events and thoughts that may have led to those terrible decisions. And so it gave me more compassion. So we'll give you a situation that everyone is familiar with. You get cut off by a speeding, reckless driver on the highway. You're out there on I-15, right? And someone cuts you off. Immediately, well, if you're like most people, some of you are more emotionally advanced than I am, but you get angry, right? Get angry, upset. You see they have out-of-state plates. That's even worse, right? You know, stupid California driver or whatever it is.
We love you.
Yeah. I grew up in California, so I can say that, yeah. Then you see, as you get closer, because you're getting ready to go up and communicate your displeasure to this person, you see it's an elderly person. Well, maybe that makes some difference or not. And let's say you were able to realize these things. You didn't, this is a hypothetical situation, but let's say his wife is unconscious in the front seat. And then you notice he's crying. And then, you wouldn't actually be able to know this, but let's say you did find out that yesterday his son died in a car crash, and that he was diagnosed with cancer last week. Okay? Does your feeling about him change from just this idiot who cut me off to now this poor man who knows what's happening with his wife, and he's trying to get some medical help to her, and so he's driving crazy. He's not even thinking right because his son's dead, he's got cancer, and automatically you start to have a different emotional experience about this person. What I'm telling you is that every perpetrator out there has a history. And I'm not saying that that's enough to make you say, oh, okay, well, that's fine, but it helps. It helps in that forgiveness process when you learn about that. Some researchers at Harvard developed this thing called the REACH method, which is so good. Let me just review it real quick with you. It's an acronym. Number one is to recall the wrongdoing, but in an objective manner. The most fascinating thing about memory is we think that memories are like a hard drive, that you save a document on a hard drive and you pull it back up, and then you could have it on there for 10 years, and you pull it back up, and it's just the same as it was before. Memories don't work that way. We recreate memories in real time. Our brain doesn't put them away. And so when you try to remember, like if I try to remember my 4th grade teacher when we lived in Wyoming for a couple of years, it's not like I have this imprint in my mind. I start to remember bits and pieces about her, and I recreate her in my mind as I remember her. And that recreation could be completely wrong. Okay, so a lot of times what happens in our memory of things is as we're recreating it in the moment, especially if we're emotional about it, we might add elements, we might subtract elements, and then that memory becomes inaccurate, which then fuels our emotions, which then gets us into negative situations sometimes. So trying to recall it as objectively as possible, talking to other people, saying, this is what I remember, what do you remember, or how can you help me process this? E is empathize with the person who wronged you. And you can use that little trick like I did with the guy that cut you off, right? Everybody's got a backstory. I'm not saying that makes them Mother Teresa, but everyone has a backstory, and you can start to understand a little bit. It's the reason I could sit in rooms with convicted felons for 20 years, because I knew their backstories, and I had some understanding of what was going on with them, and why they may have found themselves in a situation to make those terrible choices that they were responsible for. Please don't misunderstand this as absolving them of responsibility. It does not. It helps you when you do this. A stands for altruistic gift, which means to remember a time when you were the benefactor of forgiveness. If you can remember, because all of us have been in the victim seat and all of us have been in the perpetrator seat at some point for things grand and small. And so if you can remember a time when someone was forgiving to you, then you start to think, oh, I really liked that. Maybe that's something I could do for someone else. C is to commit yourself to forgive, just to say, you know what, I'm going to do this. Then H is the hardest one. It always is. You have to hold on to that commitment, because once you decide to do something, it's not going to change right away, especially if it's something you've been holding on to for decades or so. You have to say, I'm going to continue in my mind to try to forgive this person, to say, this is over, I'm putting this past me, and I'm moving on. There's so much peace and happiness that can come from that. Some of the things that practicing forgiveness has been linked to, not necessarily causally, but they've been associated together: decreased depression, increased self-confidence, decreased hostility, increased life satisfaction, and decreased anxiety. You want those things? Start forgiving. I'm telling you, it works. It works. Just little by little. You don't even have to tell the person you forgive them. You can just forgive them in your heart. You can say, right now, I forgive, and these things will automatically start to take effect. And the longer you do it, the better it gets. I'm excited for our speakers today. I want to just mention that we have our Mental Health Momentum podcast, Silicon Slopes newest podcast, is live and ready to go. That's the QR code if you want to listen. We've been interviewing people for the past 6 or 7 months and have been having some great conversations. I can testify about the power of forgiveness. I have been the recipient of it, and I have been the offerer of it. And it is healing in every way, for our mental health, for our souls, for any way you want to describe it. When you let go of things, it just works. So thank you so much for coming today. And with that, we'll pass back to Brandy. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. Give him a round of applause. We're grateful for Dr. Morgan. Just so you guys know, he's going to be here in the back. If there's anything today that you're struggling with, if you feel like you need to go talk to a doctor, he's happy to step outside of the room. So please just feel free to have a conversation with him. He's our director of mental health for Silicon Slopes, and he comes here graciously and offers his service if any of you are struggling, okay? I also want to thank, before we get going, Tom Telford with Levo. They're our sponsor for this event, and we appreciate them. He couldn't be here today because apparently everybody's getting kind of sick again. Lunch was sponsored today by Crawford Cragen with Northbound Leadership. He's been my executive coach for the last year, and I'm just telling you, he's incredible. So thank you to Crawford, who also could not be here. Lane, where you at? Lane for the pies. Thank you, Lane. She brought the pies. We didn't know that was happening, so you're welcome. Super excited about that. And I want to thank Barb and Peter. Will you stand up? And Mike and Julie, will you guys just stand up briefly? So Barb and Peter are incredible. She's over our volunteers. If you guys want to volunteer, if you want to be involved in this mission, we need your help. We need a couple of really committed volunteers for Promise to Live, people who want to put in time. And Barb has done such a fantastic job, and her husband, they're always going to events and serving the community and representing us, so thank you. Mike and Julie, they do so much for us too, always getting the lunch here and providing everything. Where's the rest of our Promise to Live team? Can you guys raise your hands? Promise to Live team, thank you, thank you. It is Thanksgiving time, and I just want to express my appreciation and thankfulness for the team, for you guys showing up and everything that has been done. So now I just want to introduce Michael Anderson. Michael is a marriage and family therapist. He helps parents and couples do the inner work so they can show up more powerfully in their families. And he's a big believer that 90% of healing relationships comes down to doing your own inner work, including personal trauma, insecurities, and fears, and we would say forgiveness in this, to get that lasting change that you're looking for. We're going to hear from him first. And then our next speaker is Chris Williams. How many of you guys know Chris's story? Pretty powerful, right? Chris was born and raised in Salt Lake City after serving a mission to Paraguay. How was that?
It's fun, wonderful.
Wonderful, I bet. For the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, he graduated from the University of Utah. He went on as an IT architect and systems engineer. He's now at IBM doing amazing things, which there's a lot of tech people in here. So tech people, you guys need to connect if you see any synergy here. But it was several years ago, the death of his wife, Michelle, and their 2 of 4 children. There was a terrible car accident involving a 17-year-old drunk driver, and we'll let him kind of share the story, but I happened to stumble across the movie. I do a show for Living Scriptures, if any of you guys watch Latter-day News each week. Oh, yeah. Yeah, big fan, right there. If you haven't watched it, I produce it, and you might recognize my voice, but on there, on Living Scriptures, I watched the movie a while back called Let It Go, and it was his story, and it was just so inspiring to me. So as we thought about what to focus on, as we're approaching the holidays, it's a matter of sometimes forgiving ourselves, forgiving those that caused us pain, and I think that this is the key. I'm really glad you guys are here, because learning some of this stuff is really going to help us as we move forward. So we will now turn the time over to Michael.
Thank you.
You can get up, you can sit, whatever you want.
Is there like a preferred stand?
Most people stand up and talk. So
Cool. It's my first time.
off the stage, you know the rules.
Okay.
On the carpet, on the carpet.
Can't get intermixed with the. Okay, got it.
You
Okay.
lose your light.
Oh, okay, good. Well, this is a really cool opportunity for me. I was telling Chris before I got started that he's someone I've looked up to for a long time, and this is a bit of a kind of a pinch me moment to be able to be up here with him. So, I'm really grateful to be here. I get a lot from my clients. They tell me this. Recently, they say, "Man, you have such a weird job." And I say, that is correct. I do have a weird job. And oftentimes I'll have clients come in and I work heavily with men who want to overcome porn use, and I work heavily with parents who want to better heal their trauma, show up more powerfully for their kids. So they're yelling at their kids, or maybe they're emotionally distant. Common denominator is they've done things that they have a hard time loving about themselves, forgiving themselves. And I tell them when they first come in, a lot of them ask something along the lines of, "What's this going to be like? Like, what do we do here together?" And I use an analogy with them, and I'll offer it to you guys and ask you to go through this bit of a thought experiment. And I tell them, what I want you to do is just imagine that internally, your internal world is like a giant home, like a giant house. And there in that house, there are multitudes of parts of you living in there. And some of those parts of you really love. You really dig them. They're awesome. That you have a humorous part of you that knows how to connect with people. You've got a part of you that loves to be outside and exercise. You love hanging out with them. You have a part of you that loves to achieve, loves to work hard. This part calls yourself ambitious. And you spend a lot of time with those parts of you. You're in the family room a lot with them. You go knock on their doors and ask if you can come into their rooms and hang out with them. And it's great. And simultaneously inside that house, there are parts of you that you hate. There are parts of you that you don't like, that feel uncomfy to you. And you don't spend a lot of time with them. In fact, you kind of push them away. If they ever try and come into the family room, you say, "What are you doing? Get out of here. Go back to your room." You never knock on their door. You don't want to talk to them. And I say to my clients, this journey, this work that you're about to do, is going to be all about actually going to those parts of you, knocking on their door, and asking if you can come in and get to know them. And it is a journey that requires a lot of vulnerability and a lot of a word that I love. I tell my clients this is going to be the most powerful word ever in your life if you'll just embrace it, and that word is curiosity. And I had to learn this the hard way with clients. I remember when I first started working with clients, I worked with a woman who she came in, she said she was depressed. She had depression. And I was like, all right, I'm like a brand new therapist. Let's get rid of this depression. Let's do it. And I tried all these things and was working on it. And she'd kind of come back every week and say, I didn't do it, you said. Didn't feel like it. I'm like, oh, that is depression, so that makes sense. Okay. And tried and just kind of kept working with things. And then I was feeling really stuck, and I went to my supervisor, and I said, I don't know how to help her. I'm like doing all the things that you learn about in school to help someone with depression. I don't know how to help her. I feel really stuck. And he looks at me, it was about a 15-second conversation. He goes, you should have her ask her depression in what way it's trying to protect her. Why is her depression good and trying to help her? And outwardly I said, oh, thank you, that's so wise. And inwardly I said, thanks for nothing, supervisor. That's not going to work. Depression's bad. Like, what are you talking about? So I was like, okay, yeah, thanks. And then he left. And next week I just kept doing the same thing over and over again. And she eventually, one week, no-showed. And then the next week she didn't show up again. And I never saw her again. And I thought, man, if only my supervisor had given me better advice, then I probably could have helped her. And life went on, moved on, and another woman came in asking for needing help with depression. And I said, all right, well, I'm not dropping the ball on this one. Let's do it. And I started all the things. It's all the same things. And she came back week after week. Yeah, I'm stuck. Not working. I didn't do it. And finally, in every session, I'd hear my supervisor's voice in the back of my head, like, ask it why it's good. I'm like, stop it, right? Like, I don't want that advice. That doesn't make any sense. So then but then finally I was like, all right, supervisor, tell me what you mean by this. And he said, listen, all these parts of ourselves that we're so scared of, actually, to their core, are really good. You see, all these parts of you that you just push away, depression, anxiety, anger, yelling, all these things, if you really got to know them, you'd find out that they're actually just trying their very best to keep you safe. And what these parts need is not to push them away, but to actually pull them close. And I said, okay, whatever that means, sounds good. And I sat down with this client one day, and one of the next sessions after that, and I just said, okay, I just want you to try something. And some background, she grew up with very abusive parents, very emotionally abusive, even physically abusive. Just was made to feel like she was worthless and terrible, and her voice didn't matter. And she said she struggled with depression for years. And finally, we sit down, and she goes, and I go, okay, I just want you to try something just go with me on this. I want you to just close your eyes and just focus in on this part of you that feels depressed. And I want you to just ask it why it does what it does. And she sat, and she took some deep breaths, and just internally she asked that question. And she said, the answer came back, she said, this part, wow, okay, there's a part of me that has never felt worthy of love. It feels worthless. And depression is telling me that it's doing the best it can, because of how painful that is, to just not make me feel anything. And it says, let's just stay in bed. And let's just sleep. And let's not even invest in relationships, because if you invest in relationships, then you're going to get abandoned and left because you're worthless. And she started to get emotional. I said, how do you feel towards your depression? And she said, I get that it hurts, and I want to help it, but I'm also grateful. I appreciate what it's trying to do. Now, I am a proud father of 3 very crazy kids. My oldest is 6, and one day he was just acting crazy, like just bullying his younger siblings, yelling, screaming, all those things. And I, as the dad, and like this parenting expert, whatever, was like, dude, what is wrong with you? Like you need to calm down. Like, are you from Slytherin? Like, what is going on here? And he just wasn't changing. And I was just like, what's this kid's problem, right? And finally, after back and forth, through tears, he goes, Dad, I'm just so sad because nobody has played with me today. And I just like stopped and I said, oh my goodness, my kid's not bad. My kid's not a problem. He's in pain. Now, I pull him on my lap and we talked and I heard his pain and I gave him a hug and he was fine. Now, I just want to close with just this thought. These parts of ourselves that we feel like are so unforgivable, so unlovable, I just want to throw something out there. Maybe if you got curious. And curious is awesome because you don't have to believe it. You just have to practice. You just be like, oh, listen, I'm just going to get curious with the idea that maybe these parts of me only did what they were doing because they're trying to keep me safe. And if I got to know their story, I would actually have compassion on these parts of me. And if I had compassion on these parts of me, I would actually start to learn how to love them. And love is not the same thing as indulgence and acceptance and allowance. In fact, the highest form of self-love is accountability. But man, once you actually love these parts of you, then you can do something to change and heal. Thank you.
Well, I am honored to be here. I'm Chris Williams, as Brandy mentioned and introduced me, and I am so thankful, following on the gratitude theme of the season, to be here with Michael and to Dave as well, and to be here with you. I'm also thankful for the lunch. That was fantastic, so round of applause for those that are did that. It's always wonderful. So I just have, sometimes they say speak in threes because that's easily memorable. Today I just want to speak in one. There's one basic point that I kind of want to talk about. And that is that, speaking of forgiveness, I would hope that through my experience, I can at least explain why I view forgiveness as one of the most exceptionally decadent, incredible, selfish, but wonderfully selfish things that you can do for yourself. And I say that because typically when I have thought of forgiveness throughout my life, early on in my life at least, it always seemed like a very selfless thing to do, and it was this esteemed virtue, something that you try to become one day. And I hear that a lot in my experience now. Having gone through what I go through, I have so many people that'll come up to me and say, I wish I could do that. I wish I could be as forgiving as you. Almost like it's being extolled as this incredible virtue that very few can attain. And so in my experience and sharing my experience today, I hope that you can see that my perspective on this has changed drastically. I think it is absolutely one of the most incredibly powerful, yet very selfish and wonderfully selfish, not selfish in a bad way at all, but wonderfully selfish things that you can do for yourself. And so let me explain just my story. The major accident or the major incident that was that Brandy mentioned happened in 2007, February of 2007. So my family at the time was composed of my wife, Michelle. We had been together 18 and a half years, had been blessed with 4 children, a boy 14, a son 12, a daughter 9, and a boy that was 6 years old. And I was serving as a lay minister, as a bishop, for those who are familiar with the LDS faith at the time. And it was a Friday night. We had just gone out to dinner as a family. My oldest son, Michael, was off at a basketball game, the high school basketball game. And the rest of us, after dinner, were just going off to get a treat. And we were going under an underpass in Salt Lake City. It's on 20th East. It goes underneath I-80, if you're familiar with that area of Salt Lake City, but it's an interesting part of the road in that as you're approaching I-80, the freeway, I-80 actually will block the freeway itself is at kind of eye level, and so it blocks any oncoming traffic. You can't see any headlights that are coming at you, but as the road then begins to dip underneath the freeway, that's when you can see the lights in the other lane coming at you. So on this evening, it was just my wife and I and 3 of our 4 children. So it was my son Benjamin, seated right behind my wife, Michelle, and then my daughter Anna right in the middle seat, and then my son Sam, the 6-year-old, seated right behind me. And so as we started to kind of descend through the underpass, I saw a pair of headlights coming directly at my car. I mean, crossing the lane, coming at us at freeway speeds. And they estimated it was about 70 or so miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. So by the time we saw the lights coming at us and having already kind of gone across the lanes, there was little I could do to get out of the way of being critically hit. They say that my car traveled about 15 feet from where we saw the lights coming at us to where we were hit on our side. So the car actually that was coming at us crossed both lanes into our lane and then made a quick turn to get back into the lane it should be in. But in doing so, it put it up onto 2 wheels, and then it just smashed right into the right-hand side of our vehicle, T-boning us, and then sending us across the lanes right into the support pillar for the freeway. I can remember the lights coming at us. I can remember my wife just saying my name, Chris, and trying to, in a fraction of a second, to evade being critically hit, but it was too late. The next thing I recall is it was almost like glass, it was almost like snow, actually, kind of falling back to the earth, and it was the imploded windshield or windscreen of our car that had not only imploded, but then the glass particles were kind of falling back to the earth. I then remember hearing a very high-pitched sound, which was the engine kind of revving at its highest rate, and my foot was jammed onto the accelerator. And when I thought about getting it off there, I couldn't move my foot, so I had to reach down with my hand, pull it off the accelerator, and then get that noise to stop. And then, of course, my thoughts immediately turned to my family. Were they okay? And I couldn't turn my head. And all I could do was just this right hand that was the only thing that was about working at the time. I was able to kind of go over and try and feel for my wife to see if she was okay. I could feel her there, but as I found her arm and I tried to feel for a pulse, I couldn't feel anything. And so in a panic, I just started to try and move my head as much as I possibly could, and finally was able to get it to the point where I could see her and that she had slumped forward with her hair veiled over her face. As I just prayed that she was okay and that I just was having difficulty finding a pulse, I kind of saw her chest sink in, and that was her last breath. And interestingly enough, in that moment, I just had this impression or this thought in my head that she was gone. What about my children? So I was finally able to get my head moving enough that I could see my son Benjamin in the back seat. And I could see that he had suffered a significant head wound that was not bleeding. I had done a stint as an orderly at a hospital when I was 16, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And I knew that in that kind of a trauma situation, when you've got a head injury that significant that it's not bleeding, that is not a good sign. And as I looked at that scene and started to evaluate what that meant, just another kind of an impression on my soul that he was gone too. And then I was finally able to turn far enough to see my daughter Anna, and her hair was just veiled over her face, and she was motionless. And before I could even get a thought that maybe she had survived and that she would be okay, another thought came to me that she was gone too, but that was the extent of it. And I couldn't see my son Sam, I couldn't hear him, but in that moment, just knowing that at least those members of my family were gone, it was more than I could take. It was soul compressing. My wife and I, she had struggled for years to have children, suffering through many, many miscarriages, and our 6-year-old was born in 2000, and here we were in 2007, expecting now finally a 5th child. And the doctors think they had found out what was wrong with all those miscarriages in the past, and this was one that was successful. We were just a few months shy of, actually 1 month shy of the delivery date. So there was actually one additional child that perished in that vehicle that day, and that was the baby she was carrying. But as I just started to realize what had happened, and knowing that there was no amount of CPR, no amount of assistance that I or anyone else could provide that could help them or bring them back, I remember wanting to just be gone as well. I remember just kind of almost pushing my head back against the headrest of the car and trying to will my soul out of its body somehow. I just was absolutely overcome with a soul-compressing grief that I had never experienced before and have never experienced since. It was just too much. As I was trying to do that and I was just wailing and grieving, one last thought came to my mind, and it was really just 2 words. And it was presented to my mind as if somebody were there just speaking these words to me. In fact, I heard them, in a sense, as if they were spoken over my right shoulder. But once again, it's just my mind kind of grasping these 2 words. Excuse me, 3 words, actually, but let it go was really what all I heard. The direction I was given is to let it go. But in those words that were spoken in my mind, I knew exactly what that meant. As a man of faith, I knew that I had to trust in a higher power. I had to trust that there was a purpose to all of this. I had to trust that everything I had witnessed to and born, that I had believed in my life to that point was in fact true. It was definitely a moment of truth for me in that situation. And so was I going to turn my back on everything I knew that I should do, or was I going to try and move forward from this devastating experience on my own, or in some other way than what I knew I should be doing, at least? And so I decided, or committed at least, in that moment to let it go. As I did that, I kind of heard I heard a wailing. So I've got my mind thinking all these things, and yet I hear all of a sudden this wailing. And as I try to figure out where it's coming from, I realize it's me. That throughout all of this, I had just been grieving and wailing openly about my wife and my children. And I remember in that moment just trying now to get the wailing to stop, to get me to stop, because it was just a horrific noise. It was hard to hear myself in such pain. And I remember at that point looking at the car that had just struck us, and it was about 40 feet up the road, up on its roof. I didn't see a driver get out of it. I didn't see anyone who had been driving it. I had no idea who was behind the wheel or what the circumstances were behind why they came across into my lane. But as I looked at that car and realized that somebody had been driving it, and that this was most likely going to impact them as much as it had me, or at least maybe not as much as, but it was going to impact them as it impacted my family and myself. I committed not only to let it go, but that regardless of the circumstance behind that individual driving that car, that it was not going to change my decision to let this go. In other words, it was full ownership of the decision. I was owning the fact that this was me taking control, in a sense, of my life, me deciding that I was going to not only control that, but I was going to control it for the future, and that I would continue to commit and commit and commit as long as it took to make sure that I stayed true to that commitment to let go, regardless, as I mentioned, of what the circumstances were behind that other driver. And it was me reminding myself that ultimately this was about me. This forgiveness that has been so publicized was really me in that moment saying, I'm going to control how I move through this very difficult situation. I'm going to control who gets in here and who doesn't get in here. And that was a key point, I think, for me to successfully move forward from that. It didn't make it easier, but it certainly gave me a purpose. And that's kind of one aspect to the selfishness about this, is that my forgiveness had absolutely nothing to do with the person that had just struck my car. I wasn't worried about them. Frankly, I didn't care about them. It didn't have any impact whatsoever. It was all about me choosing and reminding myself that my future is my choice. And how I deal with that, how I react to it, and how I move through that is my choice. Now, fortunately, once again, as a man of faith, I knew that I wasn't alone. And that's what I felt in that car. As I absolutely felt that I did not have to do this on my own, that I could rely on my faith. And as a Christian, I could rely on my Savior, Jesus Christ, that He would be there to guide me and move me forward, and that we could do this together. And that was a wonderful feeling, and it helped me to kind of get off that edge, so to speak, where I felt like there was no path forward. the change happened so quickly that when I was in the emergency, when I was in the ambulance being taken up to University Hospital, and this is something that was relayed to me because I have no recollection of this experience at all. I do remember them cutting the clothes off and trying to get the vitals, thinking that I'd had internal injuries and maybe was bleeding internally, et cetera. And I had suffered some damage, absolutely, in the car, but I don't remember any of that. I don't remember the jaws of life getting us out or any of that stuff. I just remember being on the gurney and the help being given to me. What I don't recall and what was relayed to me afterwards, however, was what I said to one of the attending emergency personnel. And he made a point of finding me and giving me this, relaying his experience to me because he was not a man of faith. In fact, he was a man that driving an emergency vehicle for his whole life would see weekend after weekend after weekend trauma and tragedy and death and destruction. Now, he was at a point on scene when they knew that it was a teenage driver that was driving the other car. I didn't know who was driving the other car yet. But he knew. And he knew that that teenage drunk driver had just killed a woman and 3 children and had devastated my life and the life of the 6-year-old boy, my son Sam, that was seated behind me. And he related to me that in that car ride, or that ambulance ride up to the hospital, he was furious. Here, once again, is human tragedy just displayed. His heart was not full of any forgiveness. It was full of the same feeling he had on every other experience of death and destruction, and that was a vengeance, that this has got to stop. Enough is enough. He was furious at the boy. But for some reason, I looked at him in the middle of all of this work that was being done on me, and according to him, I said, we have to forgive him. He was so taken aback by that this man who had just lost half of his family is telling him in his anger that we have to forgive, we have to let it go. He couldn't process that. That's why he sought me out. He's like, how in the world could you do that? How could you let it go? And so I was able to explain to him, as I would explain to anyone, that it's a choice. I mean, my comment to him was, do you enjoy living in a life of vengeance, or having thoughts of vengeance? Do you enjoy living a life of wanting to see people, punished or hurt for the actions that they have? Is it helping your life, is what I really asked him, to be happy? And I think for most, they would say no. It's not fun. It's not a fun place to be. But I did want to answer his question of how. How was it that I was able to forgive? 2007 was really a culmination of a lot of experiences in my life that I believe had prepared me to be able to let it go so very quickly. One of the key experiences is when I was 16 years of age. And I mentioned that I worked as an orderly at LDS Hospital, which is a busy hospital. It used to be up in the avenues in Salt Lake City. Now they've moved it to the IMC in the middle of the valley. But it was at the time the Trauma 1 Facility Center. That's where all the heavy trauma went. And as a 16-year-old boy, I just gotten my driver's license, had been working there for about 6 months. I'd go there after school, work the 3 to 7 shift. It was an absolutely phenomenal job for one that at the time wanted to be a physician. So no better place to work than as an orderly, which is you get patients out of their rooms, you take them down to surgery, and then you're a gopher during the surgery. You're getting blood, supplies, et cetera, for the physicians. And then you take the patients when they're done into the recovery room, you come back, you mop the floor up, and you get the next patient in. So it's a very responsible position for a 16-year-old boy. Well, one day after school, as I'm and the avenue streets, if you've been up in the avenues, they're tiny. They're not the big open Brigham Young streets that we have in the valley or in the city itself. They're very narrow and constricted. And one day, as I was coming to work to try and find a place to park, I heard a loud bang on the side of my car. It was as if somebody had thrown a rock at my car. In fact, I stopped, slammed on the brakes, and was looking to see who had thrown something at my car. And as I'm looking left and right, I see in my rearview mirror a little boy standing in the road where I had just passed by. And as I mentioned, I'm probably going like 15 miles an hour, if that, because I'm trying to find a place to park. I'm just 2 blocks from the emergency room and the hospital itself. And so I run out of the car and just look him over, just praying that he's okay, thinking that noise and this boy, putting the two together, I just hit this boy. But he didn't have any injury on him whatsoever. And so I'm just looking him over and praying that he's okay, and he's not crying, not distraught, but he just has this look of shock on his face. And those who saw what had happened came out and just said, hey, stay right here. The police have been called. We'll be okay. And I'm like, all right, fine. I'm not going anywhere. And sure enough, the police come. They put me in the back of a patrol car where it's facing forward. I could see my car. I could see where I had just driven. And the policeman said, just stay right here, and we'll come back to you in a minute. So I'm thinking, okay, well, they've got to do an investigation. The boy's okay. And then he'll come back, ask some questions, and I'll be okay. But it took forever for this to happen. In fact, not only was there just a huge amount of time that was passing, but the more time passed, the more things were coming to attend this scene. An ambulance comes, and then another ambulance, another policeman, and then another fire truck. And then at one point, they bring in this crane, like a car train, to tow the car away. And they hook it to the front of my car, and they start to lift it up. And I'm thinking, well, this is a very thorough investigation they're doing of this car. What is going on here? Finally, then the policeman comes back and starts to ask me questions just as they're lifting up the front of my car. You know, how fast were you going? I mean, 10 miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour zone. Just slowing down to park. You know, are you on anything? Absolutely not. I was just coming to go to work at the hospital. Et cetera, just on the questions. And then finally he says, okay, stay right here. I'll be back to you in just a minute. And I grabbed his arm and I said, that little boy was okay. Why all the attention on my car? And he said, there's a 4-year-old boy trapped in the wheel well of your car, and we are trying to get him out. And then he shook off my hand and left the car and went back up to my car. When I heard that, I thought my life was over. I didn't even know how to process that in the moment. A 4-year-old boy wrapped in the wheel well of my car. And sure enough, they were pulling up my car so they could take the wheel off and extract the 4-year-old boy from the wheel well. If it weren't for this woman, I don't even know who she was, just knocking on the door and asking if putting her head in and asking if I was okay in that moment, I don't know that I could have ever seen a path forward. That would have been it for me. But she did, and just her presence there, it gave me the slightest glimmer of hope. But it was hope nonetheless. And I realized what it felt like to be devastated. When my father told me a couple of days after that crash, that accident, that boy had passed away, I had enough time to kind of hold on to that glimmer of hope that I realized that was it. I just needed something to hold on to, that I didn't quite know what. At the time, I was all about football as well. And I had a motorbike accident within about a week after that crash that prevented me from ever playing football again. So as a junior, wondering if life was going to be over, it was a very, very difficult time for me. Unfortunately, we didn't have the counseling. I don't even remember like the lay minister at the time kind of coming to the house. But somehow, as a 16-year-old boy, I realized that if there was a path forward, it was up to me. I had to choose the path forward. And that was powerful and empowering to me because I decided to change my entire life. I went from being the football guy and just thinking and doing nothing of football to recognizing the talents that I'd also been blessed with. I'm not the best singer, but I jumped into singing. I'm not the best actor, but I just jumped into acting. I'm not the best musician, but I jumped into being a musician in the school. I completely changed my life. That experience, not only was it empowering, but it really helps solidify this notion that you can choose your path forward. You can choose your reality. You can choose your experience. You can't change the past. You just have to let it go. But you can change how you react to certain situations. And so that was one of the biggest takeaways of that, is that it was devastating as a 16-year-old to go through that. It was traumatizing. It was horrible, and it's a horrible memory. However, it didn't need to be the end of me. And so that's what I gained from that experience. So fast forward to 2007, when the crash happened, I knew that if I were to let it go, it was all about that choice. I guess the Viktor Frankl is the one I would go back to. It's a book I've read many, many times, and one I love, because that was his big realization in his life, is that you couldn't change his circumstance, but he could change how he reacted to his circumstance. And that is incredibly powerful and empowering. So just to close out, and I would love to take questions as well, but back to the forgiveness, though. I think that was what was also so empowering to me, is this ability to choose that I learned as a 16-year-old and had practiced ever since, was all empowering to me, but it saved my life. Because I realized after losing my family, which I couldn't control the decisions that boy made that night. I couldn't control the consequences of that it paid on my family and my life. And I haven't been able to control it since. I mean, it's been very, very difficult path forward, just with all the new changes, et cetera, and remarriage and moving forward. It hasn't made it all right. But I've always had and held to that ability that I'm in control of how I get to react and to move forward from that. So when I think of forgiveness now, it really is one of the most selfish but wonderful gifts I gave to myself. I know that if there's a consequence, I had full faith that it would be paid out in some fashion at some time. In fact, when the judge was sentencing this boy, the youth, to stand trial as a juvenile rather than an adult, he asked me to weigh in on the verdict that he was about to pass. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that, because that's why he got the big bucks, because the judge. But secondarily, I didn't want to put my thumb on that scale in any degree, because I didn't want to have the culpability or the responsibility then for what that would entail. I just absolutely wanted whatever consequence to play out however it needed to play out. And I didn't have to have any part of that whatsoever. That was very freeing to me. And I think that's also very important in looking at forgiveness as something that's selfish, because if you're, as Dave was mentioning, if you're trying to kind of hold that person in some type of a penalty box because you can't let that go, it just hurts you. You're the one that's in the box, and they're free to go and do whatever they need to do, or be repentant or not repentant, to change, not change. That's up to them. But we can only control what's up here and not other people. And then lastly, about the selfish aspect of forgiveness is that certainly there will be consequence, but I wanted to ensure that consequence that goes both ways was a positive one for me. I mean, going through a death of a spouse and 3 children was just, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. Horrific, difficult, continually soul-crushing, but I'm in control of that. I'm in control of that, which means that I'm in control of who's a part of that healing and who's not a part of the healing. So finally, to that boy, that 17-year-old boy that hit us, there's also been a lot made of the fact that I have reached out to him. But I want to be clear that I've done that on my terms. Absolutely on my terms. In fact, in my mind, I have a box where everything that I don't want to deal with, like that boy initially, he went in the box. And the people that couldn't understand why I forgave, they went in the box. Any thought of not forgiving myself for my choices up to that moment that may or may not have been a part of that, the cause of my children's death, that went in the box. Anything that I couldn't control went into that box, and it was shut tight. And then I would open it as I felt I had the strength to deal with whatever I needed to deal with in that box. I guess it's like this room. There's beautiful things in our lives, but we don't have to just take them on all at once. There's not so fun and beautiful things that we need to take on, but we don't have to do it all at once. Whether it's in a room or a box, whatever analogy that's helpful for you, you can do it as you have the power to do it. And that's how I've been able to kind of work with this youth going forward, as I've opened that box every now and then, just as I felt I've had strength and empathy, as Dave talked about, to see him in a more personal way than I would normally want to do. But if I'm not feeling strong, back to the selfishness, that box is shut. And I look to those that I trust, those that I want to be there, my choice once again, to be part of that healing. And that has absolutely saved me. So I would just recommend that in closing. If you are struggling, certainly seek the help, the counseling, everything else you possibly can get to do that. But maybe take a look at what you can do for yourself, the gift you can do and give to yourself. I don't think it's given the name forgiveness for nothing. This is a gift you can absolutely give to yourself if you just can let it go and take today as your first day of the rest of your life and just move forward. Well, thanks.
Wow. Thank you so much. That was really powerful, right? I don't know about you, but I'm kind of feeling that maybe we just pause for a moment and think about, is there someone we need to forgive? Is it yourself? Is it a child, a parent, a coworker? Maybe just take a minute and think about that. And let's see what we can do to move that forward from today. Can we just pause for just a moment and just take a minute of silence and think about who you want to forgive, what you want to forgive, whether it's yourself or somebody that you care about? I think now is the time. Now is the time to let it go. Let it go. Don't drink that poison and expect somebody else to die. Chances are if you drank the poison, you're dying or you're dealing with the toxins of that. So thank you for sharing that. I think we would like to open it up for a few questions. We have a couple of minutes. Please keep your questions maybe concise. Does anybody have a question for either of our guests? Yeah, let me get you the mic.
Chris, it was interesting before I came here today. My daughter, I told her who I was coming to listen to, and she says, you know the story about that guy? And we just had an opportunity of sitting down and talking for a few minutes. But how impressed she was of your story of letting go. You know, it's not by chance your book is a bestseller, because you allowed that to happen. There's not a lot of people that will open up and share their feelings the way you did. I just wanted to thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, you guys can applaud for that. And I think one of the thoughts I had is there, but for the grace of God go I. I mean, look at your experience to going back. None of us know what tomorrow holds, and so we have to be willing to give what we are hoping to get.
Michael, quick question for you. So I really appreciated your perspective on I think you said kind of like embracing the things that are difficult for us. And I'd love to hear your perspective on, how do you delineate between not trying to maybe push away our depression, for example, but embrace it, and at the same time maybe not going so far as to completely give in to it. And how do you advise people when you're trying to tell them to understand what it's doing for them, but not simply give in to it?
Sure, yeah, great question. So going back to what I talked about with this idea of curiosity, right? And that's rooted in mindfulness-based research, right? This idea of when we decide, I actually want to observe this thing, part of me, right? It creates like a sense of distance between it. In fact, I would actually argue that when we try and reject curiosity, it actually makes it much harder to not get carried away by those parts of us, right? And so that curiosity allows us it gives us kind of permission to say, all right, I'm just going to sit with this, and I'm going to try and get to know it. But that sense of distance allows some more flexibility with it, right? That distance allows me to take leadership of it, rather than trying to resist, but ironically, it just kind of takes over more and more and more because we're hostile towards it. Does that help answer that question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, question over here.
Hi. Couple things. Chris, I'm wondering where everyone is now. Like your son, he would be, what, 22 or so?
The oldest is 32. So
Okay.
Michael, yeah, he was 14 to 32. And
Oh, yeah,
then,
the one that was at the high school game. Yeah. Okay, so where is everyone?
So
How are they doing?
about a year after we remarried, it was a widow that had her husband passed away of bone cancer. She had 2 children from that marriage, and I had my 2 surviving boys. And so a little bit of a Brady Bunch situation. She had 2, I had 2, and we've had 2 together. Since then, little Emma, who's now 15, and Caroline, who's 12. It has been just, and Mikkel and I talk about, my wife Mikkel and I talk about this openly now, it just, and have throughout this, we knew it was going to be a challenge coming in. Just, that's a lot for the children to process. It's a lot for us to process. And so, but you know, once again, we approached it just making that choice and the commitment early on that we would be very open and authentic and just kind of deal with it as it happened. So it's been an interesting process. A learning experience is probably the best way to to put it. Merging or blending the families, but it doesn't mean that they you know, just were immediately bust. It was a lot of trial, a lot of
Sure.
struggle for them, for the kids. You know, so my son Michael, who wasn't in the car, that represented its own issues, right? That he's with friends, and all of a sudden he's told that his, you know, half his family, his closest siblings, his mom are gone. Yeah, that was a tremendous trial that he's had to kind of process and move through. And then a 6-year-old boy that you know, was severely injured in the accident, wasn't able to attend the funeral, and then, you know, didn't really feel like he had a lot of power to choose, you know, who his new mom was, or to new circumstances with siblings, et cetera, and then to share time with me, with other new kids. That was a trial as well. So we've just tried to work through it. So where everyone is at now is just, you know, continuing to heal and move forward. So my oldest is married and lives in Sugar House, works at View Hospital, and then the others are just, I've got 3 in college. Ouch. So if you want to talk about IBM and software we sell,
Financially, ouch.
I need to sell you some software. And then the 2 are, I've got a high schooler and a junior high. So it's been an interesting experience.
Well, you are amazing. Thank you so much. And just one real quick thing, that I'm a hypnotist. I work with people with past traumas. And one thing I just wanted to throw out there that may help one of you, that I do with people who are forgiving, is I have them kind of step into the shoes of the person and say, was this their whole plan in life, to hurt you? Was this what they aspired to be as a kid? I'm going to grow up and I'm going to hurt this person. Of course not, right? And I that helps them a lot to realize, yeah, that was not their aspiration in life. And so for any of you that may help, like, that's something that I do with clients, is just help them see this was not their plan in life, to grow up and hurt you and do these things to you that have hurt you, and any of that. So
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Okay.
Actually, one quick comment to that, though, and you're right. It's interesting in that, you know, I talk about that box and being able to open it a little bit to reach out to the 17-year-old boy. A lot of it was just finding out that he had struggled with substance abuse and dependency early on in his life. It was affecting his decisions. He was then struggling with suicidal ideation at this point, and was, so in a sense, this was a chance for him to kind of really change his life around. And that's what he had committed to be in the courtroom to do, was just that he would use this as a chance to make something of his life, especially in honor of my wife and my children. And then as we've kept in touch since, he's done that. He's married, he's got children, he's got a successful business and family. And so, it's been a tremendous blessing in my life to never want for a second any ill towards him. I just have, back to the consequence, I just knew consequence or karma, whatever you want to call it, it was going to play out. And I couldn't influence that. I mean, I could pretend like I could influence it, and we sometimes get in that trap that we think, oh, we can, somehow weigh in on it. We can't. Just all I can control is up here. And so it's been, I guess the other thing about that is that's helped me is that I didn't want any more tragedy. I mean, we've had enough. And one more life isn't going to, that his tragedy wouldn't make this better. That's just not how it works in the math of the universe. So I wanted him to make the best of his life because that was it. No more tragedy. I'm sorry? So he was sentenced as a juvenile and was served in the juvenile detention facility, was able to be released. And interestingly enough, he was released just a few days before the LDS Church wanted to put together a message about the forgiveness. And so he was able to be a part of that message and is featured in like an 8-minute video that's on YouTube. So it was a real tender mercy that his life now, not only was he able to be released, but he was able to serve others through that medium in a way that he wanted to serve, to make something of his life. So
Thank you for sharing that. I think one of the things that I've tried to implement always is to choose kindness, give grace, and lead with love. And I think when you're giving grace, that's part of forgiveness. And I also think about the days and months after that, the places he was going, the things he was doing, and nobody knew what he was going through. There could be somebody in this room right now going through some of that deep pain, and we have no clue. They could be sitting in front of you on the freeway driving 45, or maybe flying up on you at 80 or 90. My hope and my wish for you guys this day is through these incredible stories and education, thank you both so much, is that you leave here and that you choose kindness, you give grace, you lead with love. Forgive yourself, forgive others, look at what you can control and what you can do, and then let it go. Turn it over to others. So thank you. Please give them one more round of applause. As way of announcement, I am headed from here to Third Thursday with Ray Stevenson. I've scheduled these town halls to be every third Thursday. So we go noon to 2, they go 3 to 5, just right over at Kiln. And it's really, really a great experience. They've partnered with us at Promise to Live, which is also important. And before you leave, did you take your cards? Did you get information? Will you guys join us for the hugs for the holidays? This is my last request. I'm hoping that everybody in this room jumps on board, whether you write 5 letters and send out 5 coins, or whether you help us sponsor. Thank you to some of you who have. We appreciate you coming. Our next town hall, and Barb has that at the back. We have 10 packs that you can take, as well as 25 packs, 200 packs. Help us reach our goal of 50,000. If you would, whether it's through volunteer hours, taking it to your work, taking it to your church, doing a service project at home, or donating to help us cover the cost. We would sure appreciate that. And then our next town hall is December 5th. I'm really excited about this one too. We're going to be talking about gratitude, and we've got some incredible speakers. Linda Devenish, no, what's her first name? I said that wrong. And we also have Joel Zuckerman, who's written 10 different books and one called All on Gratitude. So he's going to be here. Thank you for attending these. Please join us in any way. And if you're looking for a volunteer opportunity, please see me. We're looking for some team members. So thanks again.